Hey good people, Batavia here. It's June and it's time for our first garden tour of the season. Let's dig in. So thank goodness for having a backyard where you can hide some of your garden chaos. So I have a bunch of things that are still on the back deck and probably will be for the next week or so. Quick note, these are some of my summer starts like cucumbers and melons and squash and things. And here's a quick trick. So this forward hook zucchini is going to look a lot like this early scallop squash when it germinates. So what I'll do, because I don't need 6 of either, I'll sow something that's very distinguishable. So this is basil that I sowed in the other half, and I'll be able to pop this out when I'm ready to transplant it and let this basil continue to grow here. We got quite a bit of rain yesterday. I'll end up dumping all of this water out because everything has gotten a good soak outside, and I don't want to bring that particular water indoors for my houseplants. But pretty pleased, I don't know, maybe 75% planted, which leaves the rest of these things. I tend to try to get my vegetables planted before I focus on my flowers. So we still have those beautiful cosmos here. Before we dig into the garden tour, big thank yous to those who like, watch, comment, share, and subscribe to Be Better Garden. I appreciate y'all. If you haven't subscribed already, consider it. There's a button below. We last left off in the garden. I think it was around planting these couple of beds over here. So I'm going to pull this cover off. I have the cover to protect the plants from the cabbage butterfly and the damage that it does to most brassicas. So we've had some mixed results in this garden bed, and it is primarily under control, I think, but we're going to check on things. I don't necessarily go inside of these beds often just because it is a little bit of a job to get in and out, but I wanted to do this with y'all on camera to show like it's definitely worth the effort, I think. So this is insect netting, and rain and water get through it without issue. I'm using spring clamps to basically connect it to the raised beds. Soaking yesterday. We're going to get some higher temps over the next couple of days. So this should work out as these plants have really been saturated. Or at least the raised beds, I should say. These 2 beds are doing okay. They have faced some challenges. Remember, I planted these brassicas later in the spring. They went in, I think, mid-May, which is a little bit late for Chicago. They could have been in 6 weeks prior. So I was keeping a close eye because we were already getting like 70, 80 degree days. And these types of plants prefer the cooler weather. Now, I've been able to grow things like cabbage all throughout the season, but most success comes when they have a chance to establish themselves beforehand, before the heat comes on. So we'll talk about the struggles on the other side. We direct sowed some beets. This cabbage looks good, red and green or white cabbage. Broccoli plants look really good. Just hoping that they'll be able to set ahead before the heat catches them. And then cauliflower. We're going to go ahead and provide a little bit of structure to that plant over there. More broccoli, purple cabbage. So this is where we had our problems. I pulled the cabbage that was planted and I replaced it with, as you can see, some chard, some kale, some onions, some celery. I had wire stem for those cabbage starts, and it started with, the plants looked like they were suffering. First I thought it was because of the heat, but then as I got closer I realized that the stem basically wasn't thickening up, and when you have a plant that has problems, sometimes bugs come and attack. So I had a lot of ants around there as well. So I pulled them. I knew they really weren't going to thrive. And so I replaced them with what you see here. I'm keeping an eye on that plant. It's smaller than the rest. I need to get a good look at the stem. It looks okay, and so it just may be that it was stunted somehow. I know we kind of threw around that word, but we'll keep an eye on that. So quick note, I'll put this bar on top, which really provides structure. I have these, I think these are U-clamps, and it holds it tight. It's most helpful if you're using these hoops for winter and you're getting snow, because what ends up happening otherwise, if you don't have it, the snow kind of folds in the plastic that you would have in between the hoops. With the bar across the top, it ends up just sliding down. But for that purpose, I don't necessarily put hoops across the top, although you can see there's a little bit of puddling, if you will, when it comes to the rain. Rain goes straight through, of course, but I think this will be fine. We'll leave this here as is. One of the plans for this space was to have all things that need some type of cover. And when I say need, this is the way that I manage like your white butterfly that leads to the cabbage worm and things. If I cover them with this insect netting, I don't let the butterfly get to the plants. They don't lay the eggs. They don't produce the worm. And I minimize and sometimes eliminate the damage. So my intention was to have all of those types of crops planted here. They were single harvest. Once they were harvested, I could actually pull this cover, because I'm trying to preserve this just based on cost, and then I would replace it with this type of netting. However, now we've subbed in some things that hopefully will continue to produce throughout the season, like your kale here. So we'll see. Maybe the cover just stays on this side of the bed. Anywho, we have other things that are growing. Corn. So we direct sowed some sweet corn. Really pleased. Keeping an eye on if all the spaces I believe I sowed were germinated. I did like maybe 6 inches apart. I want to plant those closer together so it can help with pollination. I have the potatoes here that we planted a more traditional way, along with a couple of volunteer potato plants. And then we have the potatoes we planted using the Ruth Stout method, where you're just planting the potatoes on the soil, covering it with straw in my case, but recommended by Ruth Stout would have been spoiled hay. The plants in here are doing really well. I think this is a russet potato, which I've never had that great of success growing. And I think this is the purple Viking potato. I think that's what we did. I feel like there's a die in order. So this bed, year 2 of the bed, and we planted it out, kind of doing a half and half. So each half has a bell pepper, chamomile, parsley, and celery. And then I have red lettuce in here. It's getting too warm really for lettuce, but it's pretty, and I had the starts when I started them by seed. Eggplants here. It's going to produce a white and a purple eggplant, those separate plants. And then it's just basically the same thing on the other side. So our carrots are doing really well. We sowed them very heavily, and I have this wire cover to prevent animals from digging. And so we'll thin these out. I am really pleased because they germinated like 7 days after sowing the seeds, which it's hit or miss for me with carrots. I found that the time of year I sow the seeds and kind of how I keep the soil moist is what helps them. I've tried the I tried the board method where you cover the space with a board, and it's worked out well. This place is just a little bit awkward for that, so I didn't do that, and it's worked out for me. So we'll come back and thin those probably at some point this week. I may let them get, I'm looking at probably enough growth to start thinning them. And that's just pulling up the seedlings to give the plants some space to grow. And so I have the onions here. Boy, did they take a hit with the rain. But it's okay. They are going to straighten up once we get some sun on them. Some of them, if they're really bent over, I'll just straighten them out this way. But things are looking good. We'll see again what this bed produces given the time that we planted the onions. The starts of the tomatoes, I think I'm about done planting tomatoes in raised beds. I think the rest are going to be in containers. I continue each year to try to give that a go. So this is one of two in the backyard, pineapple tomato. We're going to do something else here. Not sure if it's going to be a pepper plant, which is kind of my instincts point me to planting a pepper plant there, or maybe something else. We're going to use this space for two things. Well, three, because we already have celery here. We're going to do sweet potatoes. This is the largest raised bed in my garden, 12 feet by 4-ish feet. And since my sweet potato slips were doing so well, shout out to my buddy Ben for the suggestion of using a heat mat when starting them indoors. I'm going to really dedicate some space to them. Now, the only note is I've never grown root crops in this space. This is the very original garden space that I had as far as when I first became a gardener, and I just never got around to it. So my hope is that the soil has been worked over the years through my plantings and the things I've added to amend it, and it's going to produce a bounty of sweet potatoes. So I'm excited about that. So the last thing we're going to do here, I really want to try to take advantage of the vertical space here. So I'm going to rig up a vertical trellis where I'm going to plant some pole beans. And so the goal would be the pole beans from a root perspective won't take up much space, but I'll be able to lean in and harvest the beans as they grow. So I think I'm going to do at least 2 trellis type setups here. So I'm kind of excited about that. Containers will be saved for another day video wise, but once we get done, we're going to work on those today. And I'll share that. It'll probably be the video that follows this one. We have another tomato plant. This is a black strawberry. Look at that, me saving myself some trouble using the tag that I had for, it's hard to see, for my starts. So next up, and I think I'm going to leave it covered just because I have things rigged up. Actually, I do need to get in there. I see what I think is maybe slug damage. Yeah, I can see them here. So fortunately, it's just the lower leaves that I can't quite get focused, but that is, all right, it's a slug. That's all I got. These are my collards, and I am taking a chance in planting brassicas in this space again. Oh, I forgot. This is where it's hard to keep track of. I direct sowed some additional beets here, so I need to keep an eye on that. So I'll come back around and I will pinch off those bottom leaves that have that slug damage. Okie doke, front yard garden. So I'm super pleased with the progress so far. I think this is the first time we've seen anything besides garlic here. The last time we were here, I think it was just garlic. So this bed sits behind the porch and it gets a bit of shade. I don't know, the sun doesn't really shine on it until like 10 a.m. So I kind of have to consider that when I plant here. Although tomatoes did well here last year, I was going to do onions, shifted, thinking about maybe doing corn, which maybe isn't ideal because tomatoes were here last year, but we'll see. I want to do something that's going to get tall, but also that's going to produce, like kind of produce in the summer and be done so I can plant for the fall. We have our garlic here that's doing super well. This is going to be the first garlic that I harvest. 2 different varieties of hardneck in this space. This came up first, has had the most growth, and then I've already started harvesting some garlic scapes, which is what you see right there. Keeping an eye on them daily to make sure that I don't miss the window. We have more Ruth Stout method potatoes here. Let me put down, I feel like you always need a space to put your coffee down in the garden, or your water, or whatever your drink of choice is. And I have to get my beat 'em back stick. They come in various sizes, various material. you see a raccoon in your garden, not once but twice at 7 a.m. and you kind of walk around prepared. So potatoes, the soil line is here, and this is the top of the first fire pit. And then I have the potatoes, 8 seed potatoes that are planted, and then the rest of the space to the top line here is straw. So they were planted 2 weeks ago and they're coming up nicely, pleased with that. We're gonna do okra here. We're gonna move out these strawberries a little bit later than what's recommended. I think it's either early spring or late fall is the recommendation for transplanting strawberries, but I've just not been able to benefit from them, with the goal of trying to keep them protected from the animals, them being in kind of like this little nook here. So what I found is in previous years I've grown okra one time before, and it does nicely as it grows tall and allows me to harvest from the front porch, which is pretty cool. So we're going to do that again. I have my wire here because we're going to set up that trellis along the front fence. More wood chips that I need to put out. I'm really hoping my dahlias come back. They had returned for a few years here, although they aren't necessarily meant to return for this zone. I don't know, I'm going to give it some more time. If they don't return, I'm just going to put a container here. We have our volunteer sunflowers inside of this space. Beans, bush beans. So I moved past the plan of growing sweet peas here because I just felt it was too late to get the best results. So we're going to do bush beans. On the edge of the trellis, we're going to do honey nut squash, which is like a smaller version of butternut squash, but super sweet. We have one more eggplant. I know. And then in the other corner, similarly, we're going to grow in a tomato cage the white scallop squash, one of my favorite summer squashes. The butternut squash is considered a winter squash. So I have the sunflowers that popped up, and it would be nice to get some weeding done. And I find over here, if I put leaves, they end up drying and then blowing here. So I may try to come back in, and maybe I'll just put some wood chips here, since I'm not intending on growing food here. I find that wood chips, although I was a big fan of them some years back, have been a struggle when it comes to the roly-polies. Ta-da! I know it's a simple thing. So this is that same PVC and netting structure that we put in the backyard garden last year. I moved it up front because I wanted to grow tomatoes up here. Remember the whole debate, tomatoes, potatoes, tomatoes, potatoes. So we settled on tomatoes, and I spray painted the PVC pipe black just so it could blend in. So strictly aesthetic. And we're doing, let's see, 5 tomato plants from left to right. We have Roma, San Marzano, which I've never grown before, but it's known as like a super good paste tomato. We have Cherokee Purple, followed by a train. Then we have, I think I only have one traditional red tomato. The Bonnie Best is the 4th tomato here. And then I have one more pineapple. We have our onions that will be the first thing to be harvested out of this space. Well, I don't know. They may run neck and neck when it comes to tomatoes producing. And then I have a series of primarily sweet peppers. So I'm going to take a beat and look at the varieties. Have an orange bell pepper, followed by a jalapeno pepper, an orange picnic pepper, and then we do Jimmy Nardello, the first time I've grown that. I have a golden Cali, so it's a bell pepper. Poblano. I've had poblanos do really well for me one time, and that was in a raised bed, so I wanted to try to mimic that. 2 California Wonder, so they'll ripen to red. And then I have a Spanish Mammoth. It produces like a bullhorn type pepper. Before I get to the last sets of beds, this ground cover, I think this is like 2 years ago. I think it was, yeah, 2 years ago that I moved the ground cover from my flower bed, which we'll take a look at in a second, here, because I would get weeds in that little bitty space between the concrete sidewalk and the actual soil line. And so, I mean, this has worked out so well, I think. But I've cleared the space so I could put my transplants in for my cucumbers. But since I primarily focus on vegetable gardening, y'all don't get a chance to see the glory that is the front yard flower bed. So it hasn't put on many flowers yet, but it's in the making. So hibiscus, I have some straw flowers, more of the sunflowers that continue to join me every year, stone crop. I mean, it is a sight to see once it really starts to blossom. The new addition from last year is hollyhock, which I've read is biennial. I didn't realize that when I bought the plants last year. But I'm looking forward to what this plant produces. It looks like it's getting close. Ironically, and I do try to create some type of symmetry here. So on one side, you'll see plants. You'll probably see them on the other side. This is the hollyhock that I planted same time. So it definitely didn't grow the same, but that's okay. That ground cover, this is where I dug it up from. It was in various spaces in the flower bed when I was kind of slowly adding perennials to it. So it was a way to have some coverage for lower costs as I kind of let my budget allow me to add more perennials. But by the time this other stuff grows up, you can't even see the ground cover. So that's why it worked out well to move it. This ground cover would actually be really nice over here. That would look really pretty. It would help me with my weed problem. And although earlier in the season I considered actually moving this bed back up against the fence, I consciously made the decision not to do that originally, which I don't remember exactly why. But I decided against moving it, just didn't want to add another project, and plus I knew that sunflowers could grow up there. Alright, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the plan B, C, or D. I don't know if at this stage kind of what it is, but we did a section of cabbage. Remember, I had to pull the cabbage due to the wire stem in the backyard, so I have 4 plants here that we'll see how they're getting on. They don't look great. They were planted just a week ago, so we'll see how they come along. I haven't talked about the trellis yet, so we're going to do melons alongside the trellis, and I'm going to plant them primarily along this way. I just don't know that I have the room to plant them, to kind of getting towards those beds over there, so they may be growing on one side of the trellis, which at this point it is what it is. I pulled all of the cilantro that was here, or a lot of it. So we'll get the melons planted, and then we'll do a couple of other summer crops in these spaces. Okie doke, thanks so much for spending some time with me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them below. And if you haven't subscribed already, there's a button below as well. I look forward to seeing y'all on the next one.